Welcome back. Hamza Andrea Tzortzis is the author of Divine Reality, God, Islam, and the Barrage of Atheism. He's a public speaker, instructor, and essayist. Recently, he has been quite focused on clarifying and providing Islamic responses to atheism. We talked to Hamza about a variety of issues around atheism from an Islamic perspective. Hamza, welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me.
You've spent a good amount of your time and your life, really, I guess, in a sense, writing, talking to atheists and debating them. I want to know, why has this captured your thoughts so much?
That's a good question. I don't know.
You have no answer?
I mean, intuitively, I think it's because there was an inner drive. I wanted to articulate a positive case for the foundations of Islam in general. And because the new atheists were getting more popular and louder, I felt that we had to do something about it. Mm-hmm. So at that time, not many people were doing anything about it. So I'm the kind of guy that says, okay, if there are holes in something, then you need to fill those holes. So when it comes to outreach and articulating and conveying Islam, if there are any holes in that, meaning that there are gaps that people are not filling, then someone has to do it. So that's my kind of mindset. Mm-hmm. So I think that's probably the reason. And don't get me wrong, I mean, Tawheed, affirming the oneness of Allah and the fact that He deserves all worship, is so fundamental to our faith that not to be motivated to promote that, articulate that, convey that, and defend that, I think is probably says a lot about someone.
Let's define actually what atheism is. Can we go through that?
Well, I don't think there's an academic definition for atheism per se. Even to this date, there are debates about what it means to be an atheist. So I like to adopt a practical understanding of what it means to be an atheist. Mm-hmm. So you have something which I call a positive atheist, which basically says, there is no God. It's like a knowledge claim. So they're basically saying that I have an argument against God's existence, right? Okay. So that's that type of atheist. Then you have another type of atheist, which I would call a negative or passive atheist. Mm-hmm. What I mean by that is they simply say, well, there is no evidence for God's existence. Okay. But that would imply not atheism from the point of view of the negation, the atheism. It would really imply a form of agnosticism, because it implies that if there was a good argument for God's existence, that they will adopt it. Mm-hmm. Do you see? And then you have another type of atheist, which is more what I call a social atheist. They don't even know why. It's nothing to do with evidence. It's just a social thing. And I've actually met people like this before. They don't have arguments against God. They don't have arguments for God, obviously. Mm-hmm. They haven't really thought about their position or the negation, if you like. They just, I'm an atheist because it's my choice, yeah? Mm-hmm. Which is quite interesting. So, notwithstanding this discussion, these are not binary. Mm-hmm. You could be one of each, and there's varying levels. So yeah. I like to have a practical discussion because, this is practical philosophy. There's no point being too theoretical about it. What's the kind of philosophical definition for atheism? I think it's neither here or there. We're human beings, we're having interactions with other people, and, they consider themselves an atheist. So you just ask the question, well, what does that mean to you, for you? Because you're dealing with the human being. And I think that's more appropriate when you're trying to engage with other human beings, because if I took my own definition of atheism and I applied it to John the atheist, mm-hmm. I'm now engaging with my definition, I'm not engaging with John. Yeah. Do you see? Yeah. So understanding it from a practical point of view I think it's far more conducive to dialogue and discussion. Okay, so I want to break it down then, because you broke it down into almost, I guess, 3 segments. So one has proof that there is no God, or claims to have proof that there's no God. Like, it's unlikely that God exists.
Yes. Okay, so that's their idea. And the second one is what you're saying, I don't know if God exists or not, but I haven't seen proof of His existence. And the third one you're saying, there is probably a God?
Yes, so what would his claim? Well, the third one would be social. Like, they're just an atheist because they decide to be an atheist, right? Mm-hmm. It's my choice, right? It's not based on an intellectual position or a cognitive position. It's based on an emotional position or a social position, yeah? Like, I just choose to be an atheist because this is what, I don't want to believe in God, right? You actually have people like that, right? It's got nothing to do with an intellectual stance, right? But generally speaking, the first two practical definitions are the definitions that are going to be more popular. So you can have someone who thinks it's unlikely God exists for a particular reason, or you're going to have the atheist that says, well, there are no good arguments for God's existence. We have no evidence, so the default position is atheism, is denying the divine.
Okay, so this is good. It's a good actually idea for the next question, because in the way you defined it itself, there's an assumption, right? There's an assumption that the basis for everybody's existence, or the basis for anyone's thinking process, that there is a God. And that's really, I guess, really the Islamic perspective as well, right?
I don't know if I've assumed that in the practical definitions, but yes, I agree that our position as Muslims is that the kind of basic idea of a creator is within everybody.
Talk to me a little bit about this then.
Well, we have the kind of philosophy of the fitrah. The fitrah comes from the Arabic triliteral stem fatara, which you have was like fatrun and fatarahu. Something has been created within you to acknowledge Allah and to praise Him. So the fitrah is this created thing within you, and it has a form of primary knowledge or proto-knowledge. And that is that Allah is a reality and that He deserves praise, extensive praise, glorification. Now that fitrah gets clouded as per the prophetic tradition of the Prophet Muhammad, upon whom be peace, in Sahih Muslim, as narrated by Muslim, where the Prophet ﷺ said that every child is born upon fitrah, but then it changes because of his parenting, right? So, well, it doesn't change, rather he becomes something else, or the child becomes a Jew or Christian or whatever the case may be as a result of socialization, parenting, etc. So we know that the fitrah gets clouded. So our job as Muslims is to help uncloud someone's innate nature, fitrah, in order to awaken the truth within.
I guess that makes our job easier though, because if it's there and it has, the fitrah has an assumption.
It may be, well, whether it's easy or not is irrelevant. The point is, this shapes now the way we have to now address people. It's not about abstract proof now, from the point of view that you think that if you have a really good argument, it means someone's going to adopt Islam. Islam is not based on an algorithm, right? There's no such thing as a mathematical approach to conviction. This for me is an intellectual innovation in our tradition. When you see our tradition and the classical scholars, and we're standing on their shoulders, we're standing on the shoulders of giants, you will see that they respected reason, but it had a limit. And not only did it have a limit, it was a means, not an ends. It was a means to awaken the truth within by clouding the fitrah. But everyone's different. And it might not be rationality that's going to awaken the truth within. It might be something else. It might be having a good discussion with a Muslim and talking about soccer, right? It could be, feeding the homeless. It could be a spiritual experience. It could be so many different things. So there are different ways to awaken the truth within. Allah even talks about the mushrikeen on the boat, and the waves, the sizes of clouds come to engulf the boat, and then they realize, oh my God, they make dua, they supplicate to Allah. They remember Him, and then when they go onto the shore, they become thankless again. So even negative experiences can awaken that truth within. So even for me, when I became Muslim, it wasn't just purely an intellectual exercise. I was actually praying before I became Muslim. And it was the sajda, the prostration, that really helped me a lot in basically understanding Islam. So
you weren't born a Muslim. I guess I actually maybe I'll go back a little bit.
No, I wasn't born a Muslim, no.
So where were you born?
I was born, well, it's a good question. I came from a Greek background in terms of ethnically. I'm British, born in Britain. And I didn't really have a religion. We believed in God. My mum's Orthodox Greek, quasi-Orthodox Greek. My dad is a New Age spiritualist who would say things like, the church is in your heart, love, a bit of a humanist, spiritual humanist type, very loving.
How'd you learn into Islam?
My dad, well, we were very open-minded. I was brought up in Hackney in London, which is the best place in the world, right? It reminds me of Toronto, actually, yeah? So many different people, different ideas, worldviews, and you're engaging with people all the time. So I had Turkish friends, black friends, everybody. Indian, Pakistani, Bengali, Chinese, and there were so many people that I interacted with. So my dad, would always say, just read around, be open-minded, and that's how I interacted with Islam. So I met Muslims, I asked them,
So what was the first time you actually thought like Islam? Like what happened? I want to know. I guess really the day when you said this is a cool ideology or idea. At that time, maybe you would have thought theology maybe. Let me read more about it. What happened?
Well, someone was speaking to me. I had a Bengali friend called Moinul Ahmed.
Mm-hmm.
He was my classmate in secondary school, high school. So we were engaging, and he would talk to me about Islam, and some of his practices I thought were quite interesting. He was very distinct in some of his behaviors, right? Especially the way he interacted with the opposite sex, right? Yeah. And I found that quite unique and powerful because he believed in something and he acted upon it. He wasn't like a chameleon. He wasn't a moral chameleon, yeah? That his moral dispositions would change and his actions would change as a result of the environment. No, he was actually very, he had a stance, and that's very powerful. So the kind of social things really awakened some kind of interest in me, but also the kind of intellectual component as well.
So this life, I guess real life work for you, if you would really think about it. Atheism. Tell me a little bit about the history of it. Like, where did it come from?
Well, atheism itself?
Yeah, as a theory, I guess, really, or an idea. What would you call it? Ideology, theory?
Well, I don't know. I mean, a lot of atheists would shun that perspective and say, and I agree with them, you can't really call atheism an ideology. You could probably call the new atheist movement an ideology, but someone being an atheist, they just don't believe in God, maybe because they have bad negative experiences, because it may be a social thing, maybe because they're just agnostics about it, so they think the default position is there is no God, or they may just say, you know what, I have an argument against God's existence. Now, spiritually and metaphysically, we believe there are no true atheists, because everyone has a fitrah. So for me, when I'm thinking about an atheist, I'm thinking this atheist is not in touch with himself. That's what I'm thinking when I'm talking to an atheist. Because if they're in touch with themselves from a fitri, natural point of view, the innate disposition, it's been unclouded, then that truth will come through, that awakening will happen. So that's why when we engage with atheists, we should help them just find those awakenings. And that's why sometimes excessive debates, I'm not saying debates are bad, but excessive debates, egotistical discourse doesn't really help when it comes to human being level, you know?
For instance, when Prophet Muhammad came about, for instance, we know that the people of Quraysh weren't really atheists. They believed in God.
Yes,
right?
they believed in Allah.
And anywhere you go, as Islam was spreading, it was still spreading into empires that believed in the existence of God. When did this idea of God does not exist come into them?
You had the 8th century Dahriya, okay? These were the kind of logical positivists of the 8th century.
Yeah.
And they basically said that the universe is like self-sustaining, there is nothing outside of the universe from that point of view.
Those were still Muslims.
Well, probably not.
But they consider themselves Muslims.
Probably socially.
Yeah.
So this is where you had the likes of many different scholars, Abu Hanifa, for example, may Allah have mercy on him, Al-Ghazali, they challenged these type of ideas. And they did very well. Like, for example, in The Alchemy of Happiness, Al-Ghazali talks about the kind of spiritual philosophical approach of the likes of the Dahriya, where they're like ants crawling on a book, right? Someone's writing on the book and they think, this is meaningless blobs of ink. That's because they are reductionists. They don't have a holistic understanding of what's happening, on who's writing, right? And what is being written. So there were very powerful arguments that were addressing the thought of the Dahriya. So we did have like the early atheists from that point of view. And we had the term for atheists, which is mulhid, right? Or ilhad. Interestingly, ilhad, it linguistically means godlessness, right? Yeah. But lexically, it can refer to, it shares the root as lahad. Right? What's a lahad? A lahad in the grave, right? If you follow the grave of when you bury Muslims, there's a main hole that is dug, and then there's that small side pocket. Yeah. So linguistically or lexically, it's almost saying that atheism is a deviation from the main hole that is dug. Now, does Allah mention atheists? No, because atheism as a concept, or as an idea, or as a negation, or whatever the case may be, is essentially shirk. Yeah. Because atheists are mushriks from a spiritual point of view. Because we know anyone who denies the names and attributes of Allah, because the denial of them is also shirk. So when Allah is Al-Khaliq, He is the creator, or Al-Khalaq, He is the perpetually creating, and you deny that, well, you are a mushrik by definition, and an atheist does deny that, so they're mushriks. Do you see the point?
So then modern days, because now we just came from the classical times, because it really, I remember when I was studying, we didn't really talk about atheism that much. As a matter of fact, I remember the readings that we did were very old. Like, pretty much the scholars of Islam quit talking about atheism for a couple of centuries.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden it just popped up.
Yes.
I want to talk about why this is.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, it's so many reasons. I mean, my intuitive response is political events, right? Maybe the failure of a neoliberalism that wasn't adequate enough to deal with different minorities, because it's a changing geopolitical social space where you have lots of different people under a certain, polity. So, there's been some issues about minority rights that gets people thinking, and generally speaking, most people are okay, but Muslims were a little bit different because they had all these requests. Maybe that agitated certain people.
One of the things that really brought my attention to this topic as well, I'm sure you probably know about this because we were talking back in those days,
Yes.
Which is the picture of the one man holding a picture, and the Kaaba is behind him, and he's writing on it,
I'm an atheist.
I'm an atheist, in Arabic, right? And this was, I think this was like almost the awakening moment for Muslim scholars, Muslim thinkers.
Well, it shouldn't have been, because
they shouldn't have been.
And that's so shallow. We react to
But in
social
the
media.
Arabic world, that was the time when they were like, oh, this is weird.
5% of Saudis are atheists, according to the Gallup online poll,
Yeah.
and 22% are not practicing.
Yeah.
Right? So, look, I'm going to be honest. Reap what you sow. Reap what you sow. Right? I'm not saying we're to blame, but to always blame other people is a very disempowering position, and you fall for the pathology, or you have acquired the pathology of a victimhood mindset, which is not from the Sunnah and it's not from the Quran. A lot of it was the way we taught people Islam. Like, take the UK, for example. In the 80s and 90s, a lot of the scholars, when they came to the UK, they had a lot of love, a lot of sincerity, but what would they teach? They would teach like the fiqh of wudu, which is great, the fiqh of ablution, which is, of course you need it, because you can't worship Allah without it.
But it takes an assumption in the fact that you already...
It takes the assumption that you're fine.
Yeah.
But the problem is, if you want to build a very strong community, a faith community that's a beacon of light for everybody else and their brothers and sisters in humanity, you need to create those foundations, that world view, that spiritual, intellectual conviction. That only happens by understanding who Allah is and why Allah deserves to be worshipped. I had a student the other day, MSc Neuroscience, saying that he was asked at university, why does Allah deserve worship? And he had no answer. No answer. But if someone asked him, how do you pray? He could answer. Yeah. But the irony is, you pray because Allah deserves worship. Yeah. Do you see the point? So we have to be more in touch with our youth. Now it's changing a lot, alhamdulillah. So there's a lot of good that's happening. But reap what you sow. I mean, we need to contemporize our tradition. I'm not saying change it. Of course not. We are standing on the shoulders of giants, intellectual giants, our classical tradition. But our job is to contemporize what they said and their methodology. And when you do that, you get a lot of results. You get a lot of results. So a lot of it could be the way we've been educating our youth, right? Or not. Well, think about this, right? When someone prays, many Muslims, when they pray, do they know why they pray? I mean, do they even know what they're saying in salah? I mean, this is a big thing. And that's why Islam has become like an ethno-religious identity, this identity politics that I think is ridiculous, yeah? Islam is not an ethno-religious cult. As I said, it's a state of being and knowing. That's a fundamentally different thing. So when you teach your child, you need to teach them, who is Allah? How can you have a relationship with Him? And why must you have a relationship with Him? If you're not teaching this in your madrasas, in your masajid, in your mosques and in your institutions, then get ready for the next generation. Get ready.
Hamza, it's very intriguing talk, and I can talk forever.
Yeah, I do apologize.
But no, that's okay, inshallah. Thank you so much for being on our show.
Hey YouTube, we hope you benefited from this video. If you liked it, or if you didn't, let us know in the comments below. And if you're interested in learning more, check out some of our other videos. And don't forget to subscribe so you can get new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.